Like a good Christian, 18-year-old Beth Miller always tried to follow the rules in her conservative home in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
I was raised in church, and I loved learning about the Bible, but my family was very strict. I wasn't allowed to go to dances or parties or anything like that, so I never had any boyfriends.
So in the winter of 2006, when her friends told her about a phone dating service, Beth was curious.
It was like a phone chat line. You would hear a little profile about the person, hear things that they like. I didn't know what I wanted, but I think I was really hoping to find love.
And when Beth connected with the profile of 21-year-old Adam Carrier, she was immediately intrigued.
We both had a passion for music, and that's something that really drew me to him. So we gave each other our phone numbers.
I love that.
Before she knew it, the two were talking regularly, and Beth was thrilled to learn they had a ton in common.
He told me that his family was very religious, and they had a lot of the same morals and standards that my family did.
Yeah, my family was pretty strict too.
It was very nice to be able to connect with somebody that kind of understood where I was coming from.
After several weeks of nonstop phone chatter, Beth and Adam were itching to meet in person and set a date for January 15th, 2007.
As soon as I met Adam, all of my butterflies completely disappeared. I don't know if it was love at first sight, but I do think there was a very strong attraction.
The first time we ever met Adam, he seemed likable enough, but it was too soon to tell. I did not want her to rush things, but you can't tell Beth what to do.
We drove to a park and spent some time there and just got to know each other. We really liked each other in person. We just had that connection.
Adam and Beth's dates soon became a regular routine. But when her parents cautioned her to take it slow, Beth, a typical teen, decided to do the opposite.
I spent a lot of time in his apartment, so we decided to move in together pretty quickly. I was in that rebellious stage where I really didn't care what they thought because I loved him and I wanted to be with Adam.
As the two settled in together, Adam worked some short-term jobs to keep them afloat.
I didn't have a driver's license, but Adam was working steady and we were able to make ends meet.
However, Adam revealed that he had loftier career aspirations.
He really loved firefighters. When Adam talked about firefighting, he would be very excited.
I want to be a firefighter so bad.
You could see it in his face that he just loved the whole idea of it.
Beth was proud of her boyfriend and excited about their future. They even got a dog to round out their new family.
I loved having a dog. I would help him take care of it. We enjoyed going for walks and just playing together.
So Beth was surprised one day in April when Adam wanted to walk the dog alone.
I asked him if I could go with him. But he said he wanted to spend some time alone and just get some fresh air. So we argued about it for a few minutes, but I let him go.
Beth's irritation quickly turned to concern when Adam returned hours later.
He said, "Hey, there's a fire across the street. Come look at this. You can see the smoke from here." When we got to this fire, he was very excited.
Beth was surprised as Adam jumped out of the car and tried to help the firefighters.
I just didn't understand why he was so passionate about it. But I really thought that he genuinely wanted to help other people.
But helping others was the last thing on Adam's mind. He had something much more sinister planned.
He was hiding this other side of him.
No one had any idea what Adam was doing.
It was a shock. I didn't think he would ever take it that far.
In the spring of 2007, Beth Miller was playing house with her new boyfriend, Adam Carrier.
I loved living with Adam. I had never met anybody in my life that I connected with the way that I did with him.
While life in the love nest was peaceful, Beth couldn't ignore her parents' disdain.
Beth was raised in a Christian home, but in our way of thinking, living together outside the bonds of marriage is a sin against God.
So to us, the only option was to get married. I didn't feel like I would ever find anyone else like him.
So after 5 months together, Beth couldn't have been happier as she walked down the aisle toward her true love.
We got married at the church that I grew up in, and my mother made my wedding dress. You could just really see that Adam was happy.
I was very shocked that she was getting married because it was sudden, but they definitely looked very, very happy and just excited.
But just a few months after the wedding, Beth was learning that real marriages had their challenges.
Adam had trouble keeping a job, and we weren't able to pay the bills or make ends meet, and it was very stressful, and it made it hard for us to get along.
Get off my back.
Although there was one job that still excited Adam.
He never lost the dream of wanting to be a firefighter. If we were driving down the road and he would see a fire truck, he would just stop whatever we were doing and turn around and follow it.
With Beth's encouragement, Adam decided to apply at a local volunteer fire department. But when he learned about the extensive testing the job required, his enthusiasm waned.
Adam had a lot of trouble when he was in school, and I think maybe he was nervous. He didn't think that he would pass.
Still, the couple's main priority was paid employment in any form. So in the spring of 2008, Beth was relieved when Adam said he'd found a job at a farm equipment store.
I decided to surprise him, so I called my mother up and asked her to bring me by his work so that I could bring him some lunch. And I went inside and I asked for Adam. A manager came out and they told me he didn't work there. And said that no one had even applied there by that name. I was very embarrassed. My first thought automatically was he was doing something he shouldn't be doing. I thought maybe he was cheating.
That evening, Beth confronted Adam.
He came home like it was a regular work day.
Where were you today? I must have been at lunch. I don't know.
I let him know that I knew he hadn't been at work.
You were not there. I think you're blowing this way out of proportion.
He implied that he had just lost the job, so I let the subject go. I felt like, based on the way we were raised, we should be doing everything that we can to make our marriage work.
So for the next year, Beth kept her head down as Adam continued to work odd jobs.
Something would happen and he would quit or he would get fired. Every time he blamed it on someone else. Nothing was ever his fault.
And in April 2009, Beth couldn't take it anymore. With only one car between them and no driver's license, she landed the only job she could within walking distance.
I was just waiting tables in a pizza place, but it was a lot better financially, and we were able to take care of ourselves better.
Beth hoped their marriage would soon get back on track. But that hope would be short-lived when Beth discovered a fiery side to her husband that she never saw coming.
It never entered my mind that he could be capable of doing that.
Adam was like two different people.
I never dreamed that Adam could be capable of this kind of violence.
In the spring of 2009, Beth Carrier was working hard to repair her marriage after catching her husband in a lie.
I've been at lunch. I don't know.
We're not there. Knowing that he lied to me about something important, like a job, That made me question everything else. It made me wonder if he had lied to me about other more important things.
To avoid fighting, Beth threw herself into her new job. But one day that summer, she noticed her husband was blowing off steam in an entirely different way.
Adam liked to burn things in a barrel. He wasn't like setting a fire on the ground or anything like that. They were always contained. He would just burn trash or leaves, anything that he could find.
It seemed that the only thing that hadn't changed about Adam was his desire to become a firefighter.
He bought a police scanner and he would just listen to it so that he would know when there were fires. I felt like it was just a toy. And if he had this passion, then he should be doing anything that he could to achieve that dream. But he wasn't really trying to pursue it.
Despite the trust she was losing in him, Beth wasn't prepared to call it quits just yet. Until one night in September of 2009, when everything changed.
I wasn't happy with things that he was doing in his life. I was trying to talk to him and he didn't want to listen to me, and that made me angry. I had a drink in my hand and I threw the drink down on the ground and he became extremely enraged.
Really? Oh, you're gonna get some hands
And I was very afraid. I knew then that I had to do whatever I could to get his hands off of me. So I dug my fingernails into his arm, and the second he let go, I ran and grabbed the phone to call 911. He grabbed a knife and cut the cord on the phone. Part of me believed that he didn't want to hurt me, but at the same time, I was terrified.
Suddenly, Adam took off.
I walked over to my parents' house. They knew right away that something was wrong. My mom proceeded to call the police, and they came and filed a report. It was overwhelming because I didn't think that things would ever escalate this far.
Luckily, Beth's physical injuries were minor, except for her broken heart.
I had felt like I was tired of trying. I knew that by this time I had done everything that I could in this relationship, that I had kept my vows, I had stayed faithful, I had done everything that I could, and I couldn't make it work.
After 2 years of marriage, Beth decided not to press charges for the attack, but instead planned to file for divorce.
We spoke on the phone a few times, and he apologized, but I knew that filing for a divorce was the right thing to do.
When Beth realized her marriage was ending, she was very sad. It definitely tried, it just didn't work out. He wasn't her Prince Charming.
Over the next year, Beth tried to put her life with Adam behind her, even getting her driver's license and buying her first car. But in January of 2010, Adam found a way to creep back in.
I was at work, and one of my friends texted me, and she had been watching the news and saw his name. She sent me a link to the news channel's page.
Beth casually clicked on the link, and what she saw next would send her mind reeling. In January 2010, Beth Carrier was blindsided when she read a news article her friend texted her and saw her former husband Adam pictured in a mugshot.
I read it and found out that he had been arrested for arson. I was completely surprised. It was just very overwhelming, and my mind was scattered.
Beth had no idea that just 2 weeks before, Adam had joined the West Feliciana Volunteer Fire Department as a probationary firefighter. And on January 15, 2010, the fire department was called to extinguish 2 suspicious fires at abandoned buildings.
Both residences did not have running electricity to them, so somebody lit that fire. There was really no ignition source for a fire to start. They knew it was an arson.
And fire investigators had begun looking into a suspect, their new hire.
Adam was seen that night driving the fire truck prior to the fires being called in, almost pacing up and down the road in the fire truck like he was waiting for something. So that raised some eyebrows.
Though investigators didn't find anything in Adam's record, they uncovered more evidence that pointed right to him and brought the young fireman in for questioning.
We matched Adam's boots to the footprints that were found outside one of the buildings. His tire tracks matched the tire tracks found at the second residence. I think all this stacked together made Adam realize that he was in a no-way-out situation. That's when Adam confessed to setting the fires.
Adam admitted starting a fire at the first location and waiting for the call to come in.
I got in the fire truck and I went to an abandoned bar and I looked through the windows and I lit them on fire.
When the call didn't come in initially, he thought the fire just did not start, so he went to a second location, found an abandoned house that he lit on fire.
But when the call finally came in for the first fire, Adam responded to the second.
This raised some suspicion on what was going on because nobody else had any knowledge of a fire being over there.
Guys, where are you? I'm already at the location.
Adam told investigators he set the fires in order to bring attention to hardworking volunteer firefighters.
It just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Not only are you damaging someone's property, but you're also putting your other firefighters at risk.
Suddenly, Adam mentioned a few other fires.
It really got the interest of the fire marshal's investigator, and it made us question how long had he been doing this.
Adam ultimately confessed to setting 8 additional fires in the surrounding areas over the last 3 years.
I was shocked to learn that one of our volunteer firefighters was a serial arsonist. A serial arsonist could have any one of a few motives. Maybe it's to cover up a crime, maybe it's for insurance, or they just like to watch things burn and like the power it gives them. I believe he had some self-esteem issues. He needed the pat on the back. And they refer to it the hero complex. Nobody knows they start the fire, but everybody will know that they're the ones that put it out and save the day.
The next day, the fire chief contacted Beth, and she was floored to learn Adam had been setting fires during their entire marriage.
That's when I realized that all of these fires that he took me to, he set. The day that he took the dog for a walk and wouldn't let me come. He was so excited when he wanted to show me this fire. Now I realize that he was bragging.
On January 28, 2010, Adam Carrier was charged with 10 counts of arson. Though no one had been injured, Adam caused over $300,000 in damages, and all signs seemed to point towards an escalation.
I think if Adam would have been able to continue, there's really no telling how it would have ended up. It may have resulted in injury for someone in a home or a firefighter.
On April 28, 2011, Adam Carrier accepted a plea deal, copping to just 2 of the 10 fires, both in West Feliciana. He was sentenced to 11 years in prison.
I think Adam is wounded and he's damaged, but I know that at some time he had good intentions. He just got lost.
Today, Beth's journey into adulthood is complete.
I still work for the same company. I've moved up and into a management position, so I feel like I've achieved a lot more on my own than I ever could have achieved without him.
Beth definitely changed because of this experience. She's more independent. She has her life together now.
I'm at a place in my life where I'm comfortable being alone. And if I don't find someone else that I trust and I love, I'll be okay because I can take care of myself now.
In the fall of 2006, 25-year-old single mom Katie Cole was seeking her footing in the adult world.
My previous relationship just didn't work out, so I was taking business administration classes and raising my daughter. It was stressful being a single mom, but I had family and friends helping out a lot.
A Staten Island cop's daughter, Katie hadn't found the right career or Mr. Right yet. But the red-haired beauty did know one thing.
I was open to finding love, finding someone to help me, raise this baby up and take part in her life.
Unfortunately, no one really stood out to Katie. Until that September while at a party, when she met a friend of a friend, Anthony Greco.
At the end of the night, I was sitting in my car and he was throwing acorns at my car to get my attention, I guess. I said to my friend, I was like, is your friend an idiot? Why is he throwing things at my car? And she said,
that's just my friend Anthony.
I guess he didn't know what to say, and that was his way of being like, hey, notice me.
And Katie couldn't help but notice how attractive the 27-year-old was.
Anthony, he was handsome.
I'm Anthony.
Katie.
On the outside, he was very rough and rugged. And I guess that's one of my faults. I always went for the bad boy.
So a few weeks later, Katie invited Anthony over for dinner. And was glad she did.
We talked about a lot of things.
So tell me about your daughter.
She's beautiful.
He did mention he wanted kids one day.
Really?
I really can't wait to have my own.
He was a foreman. His future goals were to open his own contracting company. I found Anthony's ambition and his drive to be attractive.
Over the next few weeks, Anthony began spending more and more time at Katie's house.
The relationship progressed really, really fast. Faster than I or anyone could have imagined it would. He was fantastic with my daughter. Being a single mom, it's a package deal, and a lot of guys can't handle that, and Anthony seemed to be more than happy with it.
When Katie met Anthony, he sounded like the perfect guy. He wanted to be involved with her and with her daughter. He sounded like he was able to provide her with everything that she had wanted and hoped for.
So just 2 months later, Katie and her daughter found themselves moving into Anthony's beautiful home.
He was like, the house is big enough for us, big enough for your daughter. It was moving fast, but it was moving in the right direction.
But she had no sooner moved in when drama came knocking on her new front door.
We're sitting on the couch, and it's late. Anthony said,
Oh my God, this is my ex-girlfriend.
I was like, wait, what? He said, let me go handle this. I hear her screaming, saying, you gave her the life that I was supposed to have.
I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be living here with you. This shouldn't be her right now. This should be us.
I was like shocked. He's like, I'm in love with this girl, and I want to spend the rest of my life with this girl. And then she's like, all right, I'm just glad you guys are happy.
I hope you guys have a wonderful life together.
She ends up leaving.
Anthony explained the incident by telling Katie that his ex-girlfriend Melissa had never accepted their breakup.
So that was the end of it. I let it go. Anthony seemed to be someone that I could have a future with.
So that Christmas Eve, Katie was thrilled when Anthony popped the question.
I was a little surprised that he had proposed so soon, but I was happy that my granddaughter had a father figure in her life.
2 months later, Katie and Anthony said their vows in an intimate ceremony at a gorgeous lakeside club.
It was beautiful. It was absolutely beautiful. I kind of felt like, wow, I can't believe I'm actually getting the fairy tale ending.
But it wouldn't take long for Katie's fairy tale to turn into a nightmare when her husband hatched a sinister plot that would destroy her family forever.
I never saw this coming.
The lengths he went to were unbelievable.
I started crying and screaming, just tell me the truth.
In February of 2007, newlyweds Katie and Anthony Greco were raising her daughter and anxious to start a family of their own.
I felt like no matter what happens now, you know, we're starting our life and it's official.
As one of her new wifely duties, Katie decided to take over the finances and soon discovered something odd.
Anthony did not know how to pay his bills. He didn't have a bank account. The money was not enough to cover all of the bills. I mean, the mortgage was out of control high.
But Anthony reassured his bride.
Don't even worry about it.
He told Katie he recently filed a lawsuit against the builder of his house and was expecting $1 million payday.
You get about $1 million.
A lawsuit.
Anthony was confident that the money from the lawsuit would solve all the problems financially that we were having.
Trust me, I'll rob a bank for this family if I had to.
And I'm like, all right, okay.
So when Katie learned she was pregnant that May, she had every expectation that Anthony would be a provider for their family.
He always said, I want to make sure that my kids have everything I didn't have when I was growing up, and they never know the struggles that I knew.
But 4 months into her pregnancy, her husband was still struggling to make ends meet. So the two felt they had no choice but to foreclose on the house and move in with Katie's parents.
I was very excited when they moved home. I wanted them to be secure. I didn't want them to worry. A lot of people, small house, but we made it work.
Once their son was born in February 2008, Katie's hopes were bolstered by Anthony's ability as a loving father. Still, money was tight, so when Anthony suggested they move to Florida, where he was raised, Katie thought the move might be just what they needed.
He thought that it would be easier to get a job out there. It's a good place to raise kids, and I thought it would be ideal, that maybe we needed a fresh start.
So that spring, Anthony's family helped the couple rent an apartment in Tampa, and Anthony accepted a low-paying job as a security guard.
I think Anthony wanted to be the breadwinner and provider, but the money was still not enough to cover all of the bills. He kept thinking that this lawsuit's gonna come and save the day. And I found out I was pregnant again. At first, I was just scared. He still wasn't able to support us, and I'm home with 2 kids. It was a sticky situation.
To add to her frustration, Katie couldn't help but notice something different about her husband in Florida.
He became more secretive. He began taking long walks at night without me. He was changed. One morning, kids were still sleeping. Anthony decided he's gonna go to the gym, and he left his phone on the table. So I looked through his phone, and I found a phone number that wasn't saved for a New York cell phone.
Katie was shaken when she recognized the voice that answered as Melissa.
I was shocked. I was like, are you kidding me? This is unbelievable. She said that he was telling her, I always loved you, I always wanted to be with you. The only reason I'm with her now is because I have children with her. And I'm like, oh my God, this is not happening right now.
Katie confronted Anthony the moment he stepped foot in the door.
I saw the number on the phone. Yeah, I talked to her.
Katie, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. She's been calling me.
I knew he was lying, but I had nobody in Florida, and I was isolated from everything. I was desperate to come home, be back in Staten Island. I told him, you're either with me or you're not, and he decided that he would rather have his family. So I gave him another chance.
So that winter, the Grecos all moved back to New York and into Katie's parents' home again. But not even the comforts of home could save Katie when her husband's strange behavior reached a whole new level.
I felt like I couldn't protect her or the grandkids.
He was really going off the deep end.
I was devastated. I never thought I would land in such a nightmare.
By the winter of 2008, after giving birth to their second child, Katie Greco and her husband Anthony had come full circle.
It was mixed emotions being back at my parents' house. I was glad because I knew we were okay and we were safe, but I felt defeated because we didn't make it in Florida.
So in November 2010, when Katie's grandfather died, the pair chose to move 85 miles away to Coopersburg, Pennsylvania.
I wanted to be closer to my grandmother, and it was more cost-effective to be up there. And the icing on the cake would be that we're not where the ex-girlfriend is.
Life seemed a little more stable for the couple. But the very next month, Katie was astounded to learn she was pregnant yet again.
I was scared to death. I mean, granted, we were grounded and things were okay for the moment, but I knew with this last baby that we were always going to struggle.
Adding to the pressure, Anthony found out that the big payday he had been expecting wasn't coming.
When Anthony found out that the lawsuit was finally going to be settled for way less than he initially planned for, he was livid. Anthony definitely spiraled out of control. He became angry, irrational. He would fight with me over a fork being in the spoon's drawer, like nonsense.
It's just a fork.
You could tell that Katie was under a lot of stress. They had 3 kids. She was pregnant with the 4th. And she just wanted to come home.
I didn't want my kids to think that this was a normal, healthy relationship. So I decided to move back to Staten Island because his anger was out of control. Anthony tried everything in his power to get me to stay, but I was done.
So in October 2012, Katie moved back home and gave birth to their 3rd child. She and Anthony were amicable and agreed to put off their custody hearing until the divorce was final.
We decided that he would take them every other weekend down to Pennsylvania. So that was fine by me. He would come get them on a Friday and return them on Sunday. They would go have a good time, come home, no problem.
But one weekend, Katie couldn't help but notice Anthony came to get the kids in a brand new car.
I walk out of the house and I'm looking for the minivan that he was driving. And he said, no, I'm driving this blue Cadillac. And I said, well, whose car is this? And he goes, oh, it's a relative of his, whatever.
And that wasn't the only change in her ex.
He looked like he got hit by a Mack truck. Forget 5 o'clock shadow. He had like 24-hour shadow.
Terrible.
Yeah, I know. I've been working late.
Something was definitely not right, but who am I to say, like, you don't look right, you're not taking the kids, you know? I just kind of like noted it.
The next evening, Katie called to say goodnight to her children as usual.
He picked up the phone, sounded normal at first, no problem. All of a sudden he says, I have to let you know there was an issue here. The cops were here.
What do you mean the cops were there?
And then he said, there was a robbery in the area.
Oh my God.
The person tried to get into our house. He's like, don't worry, nothing's wrong. He really didn't get into specifics, and I thought it was over at that point.
But the following morning, when Katie received a phone call from a detective, she discovered it was far from over.
They were very scared. They felt like they were going to die that day.
I was freaking out. I knew I had to get my kids away from him.
On November 12, 2012, Katie Greco received an early morning wake-up call from a detective in Quakertown, Pennsylvania.
I pick up the phone, and the man on the other end says, this is Detective so-and-so, and he proceeds to tell me that there was a bank robbery.
Robbery?
The bank robbery occurred November 8, 2012 at the TD Bank, which is in Quakertown. The man comes into the bank wearing this ridiculous ZZ Top beard. He has a gun. He gets the money, runs out the door.
Luckily, no one was hurt, and the robber only netted about $650.
He said the person fled in a vehicle, and the vehicle was found on the property that was leased to me and my husband.
When the detective told Katie the make of the vehicle, she sat in utter shock.
What kind of car did you say it was?
He said it was a dark colored Cadillac. Does that ring a bell? Now I'm reflecting on all the events of that weekend. The crazy look in his eyes, the way he sounded when I spoke to him on Saturday. I just initially felt like I couldn't be honest. I was like, no, I don't know of a blue Cadillac.
Katie could only think about one thing.
I text Anthony. I'm freaking out, and I just could not have my kids home soon enough.
Once the children were home safely, Katie barraged Anthony with questions.
When Anthony dropped the children off, I made sure they were in the house, they were out of earshot. And I told him that the detective called. I said, I know you were driving that car. What's going on? And he's like,
it's not my car, okay? It wasn't me. I had nothing to do with it.
He assured me that everything was fine, but I knew something wasn't right.
Whatever. I'm gonna go see the kids.
I thought about him joking about robbing a bank.
Trust me, rob a bank is family bad.
Like, who jokes about that?
Katie was determined to get to the bottom of it. And a few weeks later, she got her chance.
He had come over, and he was having a visit with the kids, and the kids had gone to bed, and we started drinking wine. And I said,
Look, I know what you did. You need to tell me the truth.
I deserve to know the truth. You had my kids up there. I trusted you, and I want to know now. And he said,
It didn't go his way.
You actually robbed a bank?
Katie listened in horror as the father of her children confessed to hatching a plan to rob the bank with a man named Joe Scala.
Anthony Greco and Joe Scala were longtime friends. Joseph Scala had a drug problem, and he would pretty much do anything. Anthony got his gullible friend to go along with it to get some money for drugs. But Anthony Greco was the mastermind of this crime.
He's like, I was supposed to pump gas. Joe was supposed to go into the bank, do it, take off, and then if the police were following him, I was to cut the police off, causing a crash and a diversion so he could get out of, the area. I was outraged because this meant he brought my kids up there, knowing damn well what he did. So I called the lieutenant and I said, you wanted to know if I heard anything else? And I said, well, I'm telling you what he told me. Me letting them know that he confessed to me was just icing on the cake. They had all kinds of evidence.
Cops were able to look inside the car. They saw gloves, they saw the bag, they saw all the stuff from the bank robbery.
Detectives matched the license plate from the Cadillac to Anthony Greco and the DNA from the items found in the car to Joe Scala. 4 months after the robbery, police arrested them both.
I was happy when Anthony was arrested, but I also knew that this was going to put a lot of stress on Katie. And to watch my friend go through all that was very painful.
On November 12, 2013, Anthony Greco pled guilty to 22 charges, including robbery, conspiracy, and reckless endangerment. He was sentenced to 3 to 10 years in prison. His partner in crime, Joe Scala, pled guilty to the same charges and was sentenced to 7 to 14 years in prison due to the enhanced nature of his crimes.
Anthony Greco told the judge that at the time of the bank robbery, he had 4 kids, his wife was leaving him, and he thought if he had more money, she would stay.
It was just an excuse. He was so angry and so bitter over not getting this lawsuit money that he felt was his. I think his greed got the better of him.
Today, Katie is still dealing with the aftermath of her husband's crimes.
It hurts to have to tell my kids I can handle a lot, but to look at your kids and have to explain things, big people problems to little people, they don't get it.
If Katie ever decided to settle down again, that person would have their work cut out for them to prove themselves to be trustworthy.
But Katie still hopes that one day Anthony will have a renewed bond with his children.
As angry as I am with him, he's still their dad. And I hope that this experience will let him realize that there's more to life than your own selfishness, and your decisions affect everyone around you.
November 2003. New York City is shivering under the weight of a premature winter. The neon lights of Times Square reflect off the wet asphalt like a fractured kaleidoscope, but a few miles north, in the quiet, ivy-covered corridors of the Upper West Side, a different kind of cold is taking root. It's a cold that doesn't melt with the morning sun. It's the silence of a life interrupted. Elena Vance, a 24-year-old PhD candidate with a brilliant mind and a future that burned brighter than the city skyline, walks out of a faculty holiday mixer and vanishes into the gray mist of a Tuesday night. No scream, no struggle, just a void where a person used to be. The city that never sleeps suddenly feels like a city that's holding its breath, waiting for a heartbeat that isn't coming back. The precinct is a hive of controlled chaos, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and damp wool. Detectives are scouring the last known movements of a woman who seemed to have no enemies. Elena Vance was the gold standard, a scholar, a daughter, a friend. Her apartment on 114th Street is a frozen capsule of a life in progress, a half-eaten bagel on the counter, a stack of research papers on the Ottoman Empire, a coat still hanging by the door. It's the domesticity of the scene that's most haunting. She didn't run away. She didn't plan to leave. She was erased. The initial search is frantic. Dive teams plunge into the frigid depths of the Hudson, their lights cutting through the murky silt, looking for a shadow that shouldn't be there. K-9 units roam Riverside Park, their barking echoing against the stone walls, but the scent goes cold at the edge of the pavement. It's as if the concrete itself swallowed her whole. Days turn into agonizing weeks, and the media circus begins to feed. The headlines are relentless. The Girl in the Mist. The Ivy League mystery. Every lead is a jagged piece of a puzzle that refuses to fit. There's the mysterious gray sedan spotted idling near the campus gates, a ghost car that no one can trace. There's the cryptic phone call received by her roommate, 3 seconds of heavy breathing followed by the click of a hang-up. The police are working on adrenaline and desperation, but the trail is growing thinner by the hour. Every person she knew is put under the microscope, their lives dissected in windowless interrogation rooms. Her professor, a man of quiet intellect and impeccable reputation, sits across from the detectives, his hands steady, his voice a calm monotone. He was the last to see her, he says. A brief conversation about her dissertation. A polite goodbye. A walk into the night. The investigation hits a wall of silence that lasts for 23 years. The yellow crime scene tape fades and tatters, eventually replaced by the mundane reality of a city moving on. Elena's face, once plastered on every subway pillar and evening news broadcast, becomes a grainy memory in a dusty file box labeled unsolved. The New York 2003 cold case becomes a cautionary tale, a ghost story whispered by freshmen in the halls of Columbia. But the shadows have a way of stretching, and the truth has a way of breathing, even under 2 decades of dust. The community moved on, but the wound never truly closed. It stayed raw, hidden behind the shuttered windows of a grieving family and the weary eyes of a detective who refused to retire his conscience. Then comes the spark, a shift in the atmosphere. A breakthrough that doesn't come from a witness or a confession, but from the silent, microscopic code of the dead. It's 2026, and the world has changed, but the ghosts of 2003 are still restless. A new forensic technique, a leap in genetic genealogy that sounds like science fiction, begins to pull a thread from a piece of evidence long thought to be useless, a single, degraded strand of hair found on Elena's scarf, recovered from a trash bin miles away from the disappearance. For 20 years, that hair was a dead end. Now it's a map. The DNA doesn't just point to a suspect. It points to a lineage. It points to a secret kept in plain sight. The revelation hits the NYPD cold case unit like a physical blow. The profile doesn't lead to a career criminal or a drifter passing through the city. It leads back to the very heart of the ivory tower. It leads to a man who spent the last 2 decades being honored, published, and respected. The killer with the mask of knowledge. The arrest is a surgical strike. No sirens, no high-speed chase. Just a knock on a heavy oak door in a prestigious faculty housing complex. When the handcuffs click, the sound vibrates through the entire academic community. The shock is visceral. The man who taught ethics, who mentored hundreds, who spoke at Elena's memorial service with tears in his eyes, is the man who ended her. As the details emerge, the chilling precision of the crime begins to take shape. It wasn't a crime of passion. It was a crime of cold, calculated intellect. He had used his position, his perceived harmlessness, and his deep knowledge of the city's blind spots to orchestrate a disappearance that stumped the best investigators for a generation. He watched the investigation from the front row. He comforted the family. He lived a full, decorated life while Elena Vance remained a ghost in a box. The New York 2003 cold case solved headline isn't just a news update, it's a tectonic shift. It's the realization that the monster wasn't hiding in the dark alleys, but in the lecture halls, behind a veil of sophisticated rhetoric and tweed jackets. The interrogation room is different now. It's digital, high-tech, but the tension is ancient. The suspect sits as he did 23 years ago, calm, composed, his intellect still his primary weapon. But the DNA doesn't lie, and the timeline, once a blur of snowy nights and forgotten details, is now a razor-sharp reconstruction of his movements. The Manoir KY Law from 2003, the gray sedan, the timed phone calls, suddenly make sense. They weren't accidents, they were decoys. He played a game of chess with the NYPD, and for 23 years he was winning. But he forgot one thing. Science doesn't forget, and time doesn't erase the stain of blood. The city is reeling. The SOC Seongdong is palpable in every coffee shop and faculty lounge. How could he have stayed so close? How could he have looked her parents in the eye? The psychological profile of the killer is a descent into a dark, narcissistic void. A man who believed his intellect made him untouchable, who viewed a human life as a variable to be removed. The Mat Ron Nuoy isn't just the murder itself, but the 23 years of performance that followed. Every handshake, every lecture, every holiday dinner was a lie maintained with sociopathic brilliance. The final closure comes not with a bang, but with a heavy, haunting silence as the evidence is laid out in open court. The images of Elena Vance, the bright, smiling woman from 2003, are projected onto a screen, juxtaposed against the aging, gray-haired man in the dock. The contrast is a punch to the gut. The years he stole from her are visible in every wrinkle on his face.
The dư âm và nỗi ám ảnh We Never Truly Leave the Street of the Upper West Side.
Every time the wind howls through the stone arches of the university, people will remember the girl who vanished and the professor who hid in the light. As the sun sets over the New York skyline, the cold case is officially closed, but the shadow remains. The story of Elena Vance is a reminder that the most terrifying monsters are the ones who know exactly how to look human. The case is solved, the arrest is made, and the Cheondang Sat Thursday Mang Mat Na Trai Tuk is finally unmasked. But as the city lights flicker on, one question lingers in the air, cold and persistent. How many other secrets are hiding in the archives, waiting for the light of the future to find them? The files are closed, the tape is gone, but the echo of 2003 will never be completely silent. The echoes of that arrest still vibrate through the concrete canyons of Manhattan, but to understand the resolution, we must return to the beginning of the end, to the precise moment the silence of 23 years was shattered. The year 2003 didn't just lose Elena Vance, it lost its sense of safety. The New York 2003 cold case wasn't a file that gathered dust, it was a file that bled. While the world moved on to smartphones and social media, a small, dedicated team in a windowless room in Lower Manhattan stayed obsessed. They lived with Elena's graduation photo pinned to their wall, a constant reminder of a brilliance extinguished. They weren't looking for a ghost anymore. They were looking for a ghost's mistake. Every criminal, no matter how meticulous, leaves a signature. The problem with the killer with the mask of knowledge was that his signature was written in disappearing ink. The breakthrough began not in a crime lab, but in a quiet laboratory in Northern Europe, where a new algorithm for phenotypic reconstruction was being perfected. For years, the DNA sample from that discarded scarf was considered junk, too degraded, too contaminated by the elements of a New York winter. But science is a patient hunter. By early 2026, the NYPD Cold Case Unit sent the microscopic remains to this facility. They weren't just looking for a match in a database. They were looking for a face. When the data began to crunch, it didn't return a name. It returned a lineage. It pointed to a small pocket of the population with roots in a specific village in the Austrian Alps. This was the first crack in the professor's armor. He wasn't just a New Yorker. He was a man with a heritage that he thought was buried under layers of American prestige. The Manoir KY law that had haunted the 2003 detectives, the gray sedan, suddenly reappeared in the digital archives. Using AI-enhanced restoration on old grainy CCTV footage from a bodega 3 blocks from the disappearance, investigators managed to pull a partial license plate that had been invisible to the human eye for 2 decades. It wasn't registered to the professor. It was registered to a shell company, a research foundation he had established in the late 90s. The complexity of the cover-up was staggering. He hadn't just killed. He had engineered a disappearance using the same methodology he used for his historical research, cross-referencing, obfuscation, and the creation of false trails. He was treating the NYPD like a group of students failing a midterm exam. The tension in the precinct reached a fever pitch as the genetic genealogy results mapped the suspect's family tree directly to Dr. Julian Vane. The name sent a shiver through the room. Vane wasn't just any professor. He was a pillar of the community, a man who had sat on the mayor's advisory board for education. The SOC Songdong was no longer a possibility. It was an impending explosion. Detectives began a silent surveillance, watching the man they had interviewed 5 times in 2003. He was older now, his hair a distinguished silver, his gait slightly slower, but his eyes, those sharp, analytical eyes, remained unchanged. He was still teaching. He was still walking the same streets where Elena had vanished. He was a predator hiding in the middle of the herd, wearing the skin of a shepherd. The night before the arrest, the lead detective sat in his car outside Vane's brownstone, watching the warm glow of the library windows. Inside, the professor was likely sipping a vintage port, surrounded by the leather-bound books that served as his fortress. The detective thought about the Bemat Ron Nuoy, buried beneath that floor or perhaps tucked away in a safe deposit box. There is a specific kind of evil that doesn't scream. It calculates. It waits. It enjoys the irony of its own survival. Vane had written books on the nature of justice, all while he held the secret of a young woman's final moments in the palm of his hand. The irony wasn't just cruel, it was a taunt. When the sun rose over New York the following morning, the atmosphere was heavy, charged with the electricity of a storm that had been brewing for 23 years. The New York 2003 cold case solved wasn't just a headline yet, it was a tactical plan. The police didn't want a scene, they wanted a confession. They knew that with a man like Vane, ego was the only weakness. If they could wound his pride, they could break his silence. As the tactical units moved into position, the city around them remained oblivious. Commuters rushed to the subway, tourists took photos of the skyline, and in a quiet office on the 4th floor of the university, Dr. Julian Vane adjusted his tie in the mirror, unaware that his 23-year masquerade was about to end in a flurry of handcuffs and flashbulbs. The entry was silent. The arrest was swift. But the look on Vane's face when the lead detective whispered Elena Vance's name wasn't one of fear. It was one of recognition. It was the look of a grandmaster who had finally been put in checkmate. He didn't struggle. He didn't shout. He simply asked for his coat. The Chandong Sat Thursday Mang Mat Na Trai Tuk was finally being dragged into the harsh light of the precinct. In the interrogation room, the air felt thin. Vane sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table, a stark contrast to the frantic energy of the detectives around him. He began to speak, not in the voice of a criminal, but in the voice of a lecturer, dissecting the inevitability of discovery, as if it were a philosophical concept rather than his own downfall. As the news broke, the coup SOC rippled through the city like a physical shockwave. Former students called the news desks in tears. Colleagues stood in the hallways of the university in stunned silence. The cold case was no longer a mystery. It was a mirror reflecting the darkness that can exist within the most respected institutions. The details of the 2003 investigation were reopened, revealing how Vane had used his influence to steer the narrative away from himself, how he had planted Manwa KY law to lead police toward phantom suspects. He had played a long game, a game that required nerves of steel and a total absence of empathy. He hadn't just killed Elena, he had attempted to kill the truth itself. But the truth is a stubborn thing. It doesn't decompose. It doesn't fade with the seasons. It waits in the marrow of the bone and the sequence of the DNA. The Matt Ron Nuoy was finally out. Vane had kept a diary, not of his crimes, but of his observations of the investigation. He had documented the police's failures, their missed opportunities, their frustrations. It was his ultimate prize, a record of his superiority. This diary, found hidden behind a false panel in his office, became the final nail in his coffin. It wasn't just evidence, it was a roadmap of a sociopath's mind. The New York 2003 cold case was finally over, but the do and va noi on were only beginning. For the family of Elena Vance, the closure was a hollow victory. 23 years of birthdays, holidays, and milestones had been stolen by a man who thought he was too smart to be caught. The community was left to grapple with the terrifying reality that the person they trusted to shape the minds of the future was a man who had destroyed a life in the past. As the cameras flashed and the reporters shouted their questions, one thing became clear. Justice may be slow and it may be cold, but when it arrives, it is as relentless as the tide. The final image of Part 2 is the professor being led down the courthouse steps, his face stone cold, his eyes fixed on some distant point. He is no longer the brilliant mind or the respected mentor. He is a cold case solved. He is the man who thought he could outrun time, only to find that time was merely waiting for the technology to catch up. The streets of the Upper West Side look the same, but they feel different now. The shadow of 2003 has been lifted, but the chill of the truth remains, a haunting reminder that even in a city of 8 million people, there is nowhere to hide from the ghosts of the past. The discovery of Dr. Julian Vane's diary changed everything. It wasn't just a confession, it was a manifesto of malice. As investigators turned the yellowed pages of the journal found behind the mahogany paneling of his office, the New York 2003 cold case transformed from a tragic mystery into a calculated horror. The entries didn't start with a crime. They started months before, documenting his growing obsession with Elena Vance's intellectual insolence. He didn't kill her because of a sudden impulse. He killed her because she had challenged his theories in a seminar, because her mind was a threat to his ego. The Matt Ron Nuoy was now laid bare. The murder was an academic correction in his twisted mind. He described her not as a human being, but as a variable that needed to be neutralized to preserve the purity of his own legacy. The diary provided a minute-by-minute reconstruction of that snowy night in November 2003. It revealed the Manwa KY law that had baffled the NYPD for decades. The gray sedan wasn't just a vehicle, it was a mobile laboratory where he had prepared his tools. He had stalked her for weeks, mapping the blind spots of the campus security cameras, calculating the exact window of time between the end of the faculty mixer and the moment the streetlights flickered on. He wrote about the sublime silence of the Upper West Side as he approached her, the way the snow muffled his footsteps, and the exhilarating precision of the abduction. He didn't just take her life. He took pride in the fact that he did it within earshot of a dozen people, none of whom heard a thing. The details of Elena's final hours, as recorded in Vane's elegant, cursive handwriting, were enough to make seasoned detectives turn away. He had taken her to a secondary location, a remote property in upstate New York that he had rented under a pseudonym. There, the professor became the inquisitor. He didn't want money, and he didn't want a ransom. He wanted her to admit he was right. The chandong of the case intensified as the public learned that Elena had remained defiant until the very end. Even in the face of death, her intellect remained sharp, her spirit unbroken. Vane's frustration bled through the ink on the pages. He hated her for her courage even more than he hated her for her intelligence. Back in the city, the SOC Songdong morphed into a profound sense of betrayal. The university, an institution built on the search for truth, had harbored a predator who used the tools of logic to justify the illogical act of murder. Students organized vigils, not just for Elena, but for the loss of their own sense of safety. The cold case was no longer just a legal term, it was a cultural trauma. Every lecture Vane had given, every book he had authored, was now stained with the knowledge of what he was doing in his off hours. The community realized that they hadn't been taught by a scholar, but by a monster who used the classroom as a stage to practice his deceptions. The forensic team, empowered by the diary's clues, returned to that upstate property. Beneath the floorboards of an old tool shed, they found the physical remnants of the New York 2003 cold case. Elena's student ID, her cracked glasses, and a single earring, small, silver, and shaped like a star. These weren't just pieces of evidence. They were the physical weight of a stolen future. Seeing these items on the evening news brought the reality of the crime home to a new generation of New Yorkers who hadn't even been born when she vanished. The Manhwa KY law of the past were now the concrete proof of the present. The professor's mask of knowledge was completely shattered, leaving behind nothing but the hollow shell of a man who thought he was a god. In the interrogation room, the lead detective pushed the diary across the table. Vane didn't flinch. He looked at his own words with a sense of detached nostalgia. When asked if he felt any remorse, he simply adjusted his glasses and remarked on the quality of the prose. It was a moment of pure, chilling sociopathy. He wasn't sorry for Elena. He was only sorry that his experiment had finally concluded. The Be Mat Ron Nuoi wasn't just that he had killed, but that he had enjoyed the 23 years of silence more than the act itself. He had thrived on the mystery, feeding off the city's fear and the family's grief like a parasite. The legal proceedings that followed were a circus of the macabre. The defense tried to argue that the diary was a work of fiction, a dark creative exercise by a brilliant but troubled mind. But the DNA didn't care about literary theory. The blood found on the silver earring matched the profile extracted from the 2003 scarf. The New York 2003 cold case solved was no longer a headline. It was an ironclad certainty. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who had used his tenure as a shield, his reputation as a weapon, and his intellect as a shroud. They showed the jury the face of a girl who wanted to change the world, and the face of the man who stopped her because she dared to be better than him. As the trial reached its climax, the Du M Va Noim On became a heavy fog over the city. People began to look at their neighbors, their mentors, and their friends with a new, cynical eye. If a man like Julian Vane, a man of such high standing, could be capable of such depravity, who else was hiding in the light? The SOC Songdong led to a massive overhaul of how the university vetted its staff, but the damage was done. The ivory tower had been breached. The cold case had proven that the most dangerous places aren't always the dark alleys. Sometimes, they're the most prestigious zip codes. The final entry in the diary was dated just days before his arrest. In it, Vane speculated on how much longer he could keep the secret. He wrote about the feeling of the noose of time tightening around his neck, not with fear, but with a strange, clinical curiosity. He knew the technology was catching up. He knew the New York 2003 cold case was heating up. He ended the journal with a single, chilling sentence. The truth is a poor student, but it never misses a deadline. It was the only honest thing he had written in 23 years. The closure of Part 3 leaves the city in a state of mourning and introspection. The New York 2003 cold case solved is a victory for justice, but a defeat for the human spirit. Elena Vance was finally found, but the world she should have inhabited was gone. The Chandong Sat Thursday Mang Mat Na Trai Tuk was now headed for a cell, but the questions he raised about the nature of evil would linger for decades. As the court adjourned, the silence that followed was different than the silence of 2003. It wasn't the silence of a mystery. It was the silence of a tragedy that had finally been spoken aloud. The silence of the courtroom was shattered by a name no one expected to hear: Thomas Miller. In 2003, he was a 19-year-old bike messenger, a blur in the New York night. Today, he stood as the man KY law that the NYPD had missed by a matter of inches. He was the surprise witness who had seen the gray sedan, but more importantly, he had seen the man behind the wheel without his academic armor. Miller's testimony brought a visceral, raw energy to the New York 2003 cold case, stripping away the intellectual pretenses Vane had built around himself. He described a man who didn't look like a professor, but like a predator in a state of frantic, jagged adrenaline. Miller recounted that night with a clarity that only trauma can preserve. He had been cutting through an alleyway near 114th Street to beat a red light when the gray sedan nearly clipped his front tire. The SOC Song-dong deepened as Miller described how the driver, Julian Vane, had leaned out of the window, not to apologize, but to snarl a threat. In that moment, the mask of knowledge had slipped, revealing a face contorted by a bemat Ron Nuoy. Miller saw a woman's silhouette in the passenger seat, slumped against the glass, her hair matted against the window. At the time, he thought it was a drunk student being driven home. For 23 years, that assumption had been his own personal prison. The guilt that Miller carried became a central theme of the trial's fourth week. He told the jury how he had tried to report the incident the following day, but in the chaos of the disappearance, his vague description of a gray car and a middle-aged man was buried under thousands of other leads. The cold case was a failure of the system to connect the dots, a reminder that in a city of millions, the truth often hides in the noise. Miller's tears in the witness box weren't just for Elena. They were for the 2 decades he spent wondering if he could have changed the ending of this horror story. Across the aisle, the Vance family sat like statues carved from grief. Elena's mother, her hair now white, her eyes never leaving Vane, listened to the description of her daughter's final moments in that car. The do em va noi em on were no longer abstract concepts. They were sitting in the room with them. For the Vances, the New York 2003 cold case solved was a paradox. It brought the Chandong Sat Thursday to justice, but it also forced them to relive the nightmare in high definition. Every detail Miller provided was a new wound. They learned that Elena wasn't just taken. She was taken while the city went about its business, just a few feet away. The prosecution used Miller's testimony to dismantle the defense's literary fiction argument. They synchronized his account with the GPS data recovered from Vane's old Palm Pilot, a piece of Manhwa KY law tech that had been sitting in a box of Vane's personal effects. The digital footprints matched the physical path Miller described. The professor was no longer a philosopher of ethics. He was a kidnapper caught in a bike messenger's peripheral vision. The air in the courtroom became heavy, almost suffocating, as the net finally closed. The bemat Ron Nuoy was no longer a secret. It was a map of a crime. Vane's reaction to Miller was his first true sign of weakness. For the first time, he didn't look like a man in control of a lecture. He looked like a man who realized he had been seen. He fidgeted with his pen, his eyes darting toward the exit. The Chandong was seeing the predator turn into the prey. The intellectual superiority he had used to insulate himself from the New York 2003 cold case was evaporating. He wasn't a master of the universe. He was a man who had been outrun by a bike messenger's memory and a 23-year-old piece of technology. As the day's proceedings ended, the media swarmed the courthouse steps. The headline, New York 2003 cold case solved. Witness breaks 23-year silence, was already flashing across smartphones globally. The public's obsession shifted from the how to the why. Why did it take so long? Why was Miller's lead ignored? The SOC Song-dong turned into a demand for accountability within the NYPD. The case was becoming more than a murder trial. It was a trial of the city's institutions. It exposed the Manhwa KY law that are often dismissed because they don't fit the narrative of a perfect crime. The psychological weight of the trial began to bleed into the city's consciousness. People started sharing their own missed sightings and near misses from 2003, creating a collective sense of du am va noi am on. It was as if the entire city of New York was trying to exorcise the ghost of Elena Vance. The university announced it would be renaming the library wing after her, a gesture that felt both necessary and woefully inadequate. No building could replace the life that had been neutralized by a man who valued his own ego over human existence. In the final hour of the day, a secondary witness was called, a former colleague of Vane's who recalled him being unusually focused on the Vance investigation in its early days. He had volunteered to act as a liaison between the faculty and the police. The bemat ra nuoi was that he had inserted himself into the heart of the search to ensure it never found him. He was the fox guarding the henhouse, the manwa ky law, hiding in plain sight. He had used his mask of knowledge to monitor the very detectives who were hunting him, a betrayal of trust that felt as cold as the November night Elena vanished. The day ended with a haunting image, the silver earring, the star that Elena wore, held up by the prosecutor. It caught the light of the courtroom, a small, bright spark in a room filled with darkness. It was the physical heart of the New York 2003 cold case. As the jury filed out, the silence was heavy with the realization that justice was finally, painfully, catching up. The Chandung Sat Thursday Mang Mat Na Tri Tuk was being painted stroke by stroke, and the final picture was one that New York would never be able to forget. The atmosphere inside the courtroom has reached a freezing point as the defense prepares their final, desperate psychological gambit. This isn't just a legal battle anymore. It's a war of the mind. Julian Vane's lawyers, realizing the physical evidence is an iron cage, attempt to pivot toward a diminished capacity plea, suggesting that the New York 2003 cold case was the result of a dissociative break brought on by academic burnout and an undiagnosed personality disorder. They want to turn the Chandung Sat Thursday Mang Mat Na Tri Tuk into a victim of his own brilliance, a man whose mind simply fractured under the weight of its own complexity. The SOC Tsongdong grows as the defense brings in high-priced psychiatrists to testify that Vane didn't know the difference between his dark research and reality. But the prosecution isn't playing games. They know that Vane's greatest weapon is his ego, and the only way to destroy a man who thinks he's a god is to make him prove he's a monster. In a move that sends shockwaves through the gallery, they called Julian Vane to the stand.
Yes, electric.
A defendant testifying in his own capital murder trial is a rarity. A serial predator doing it is a spectacle. Vane walks to the witness box with a terrifying composure, his movements fluid, his mask of knowledge seemingly restored. He doesn't look like a man facing life in prison. He looks like a man about to deliver a keynote address. The cross-examination begins not with a shout, but with a whisper. The prosecutor leans in, holding a copy of Elena Vance's unfinished dissertation. He asks Vane about a specific footnote, a minor point of historical contention that Elena had argued against him. The manwa ky law here isn't physical, it's intellectual. As they debate the nuances of Ottoman history, Vane's composure begins to crack. He can't help himself. He starts to correct the prosecutor. He starts to show the bemat ra nuoi of his narcissism. He speaks of Elena not with regret, but with a lingering, academic spite. She was talented, Vane sneers, his voice echoing in the silent room. But she was undisciplined. She didn't understand that history belongs to those who have the strength to write it. The New York 2003 cold case solved isn't just about finding a body, it's about unearthing the motive. Under the relentless pressure of the prosecution, Vane finally breaks his silence on the night of the murder. He describes the abduction not as a crime, but as a necessary conclusion to an intellectual rivalry. He admits to the gray sedan, the upstate property, and the hours of debate he forced upon a terrified 24-year-old. He speaks about the silver star earring with a chilling fondness, calling it a trophy of a superior argument. The Chandung Sat Thursday is now fully illuminated, a man who killed because he couldn't win an argument with a student. The psychological gambit of the defense has backfired spectacularly. Instead of a broken man, the jury sees a predator who is proud of his work. Vane details how he watched the NYPD from his office window, how he felt a sense of profound amusement watching the detectives follow the false leads he had planted. The be Matt Ron Nuoy was his total lack of fear. He believed his status made him invisible. He tells the court that he only kept the diary because he wanted the world to eventually know how much smarter he was than the law. It was never a confession for him. It was an autobiography of a superior being. As the sun begins to set outside the courthouse, casting long, jagged shadows over Manhattan, the prosecution plays a final piece of evidence. It's a recovered voicemail from Elena's phone, one that had been distorted by 2003 technology, but was now cleaned by modern AI. It's only 5 seconds long. You can hear the wind, the sound of a car door slamming, and Elena's voice, clear and unwavering. "I know it's you, Professor. I'm not afraid." The SOC Tsongdong is deafening. In those 5 seconds, the victim becomes the hero, and the brilliant professor is exposed as a coward. Vane's reaction to the recording is the final nail. He doesn't cry. He doesn't scream. He simply stops talking. The mask of knowledge falls away, leaving nothing but a hollow, aging man staring at a digital recording of the woman he couldn't break. The New York 2003 cold case has reached its peak. The legalities will continue, the jury will deliberate, but the truth is now an undeniable force in the room. The city of New York, which had lived with this mystery for 23 years, finally has its answer, and it is far darker than anyone had imagined. The evening news begins to broadcast the highlights of the testimony.
Theo chân dung sát thủ mang mặt nạ tri thức yes on every screen in Times Square.
The do am va noim on of Vane's cold, clinical voice will stay with the jurors for the rest of their lives. As the court adjourns for the day, the lead detective stands by the window, looking out at the city lights. The case is solved, but the weight of what was lost, the brilliant mind of Elena Vance and the 2 decades of stolen justice, hangs heavy in the air. The cold case is over, but the winter of the soul is just beginning for everyone involved. The gavel falls with a sound that seems to crack the very foundation of the courthouse, a sharp, wooden finality that ends 23 years of waiting.
Guilty.
The word hangs in the air, heavy and absolute, reverberating through the packed gallery like a physical blow. For the family of Elena Vance, the New York 2003 cold case solved headline is finally, officially real. There is no applause, no cheering, just a collective release of breath from a city that has been holding it for 2 decades. Dr. Julian Vane, the man who wore the mask of knowledge so tightly it became his skin, stands impassive. He doesn't look at the jury. He looks through them, his expression one of bored disappointment, as if he is watching a lecture that has gone on too long. He is sentenced to life, without the possibility of parole, a permanent exile from the world he thought he owned. The SOC Tsongdong begins to settle into a grim satisfaction. The monster is caged. The books are closed. But the story doesn't end with the closing of a cell door. In the world of cold cases, one answer often spawns a dozen new questions, and the diary of Julian Vane was a text that had not yet been fully deciphered. While the media trucks were packing up outside the courthouse, a team of forensic anthropologists and FBI specialists were quietly returning to the upstate property, that isolated farmhouse surrounded by the desolate woods of the Catskills. They weren't there to double-check the evidence for the trial. That was done. They were there because of a single, cryptic phrase found in the margins of Vane's journal, scrawled in ink so faded it was almost invisible. The curriculum requires more than one student. The implications of that sentence sent a chill through the entire investigation team that was colder than the mountain air. If Elena Vance was a student, in Vane's twisted worldview, then who were the others? The Manhwa KY law that had been dismissed as ramblings were now being re-examined as a roadmap to a graveyard. This time, the police didn't bring shovels, they brought ground-penetrating radar. They swept the perimeter of the property, moving far beyond the tool shed where Elena's items were found. They scanned the rolling hills, the dense thicket of pines, and finally, the manicured English garden that Vane had tended to with obsessive care for 20 years. The machine screamed. A massive anomaly, 10 feet beneath the bed of prize-winning roses. It wasn't a rock formation and it wasn't a root system. It was a geometric void, a structure. The realization hit the team with the force of a physical blow. The tool shed was a decoy. The real secret, the true Bimatron Nuoi, was buried deeper. Excavators were brought in under the cover of darkness, tearing through the earth with a violence that mirrored the urgency of the detectives. As the claw of the machine struck concrete, the sound echoed like a tomb being cracked open. They had found a bunker. It wasn't a crude hole in the ground. It was a reinforced, ventilated, concrete chamber, built with the precision of an architect. As the team breached the heavy steel door, the air that rushed out was stale, smelling of old paper and damp earth, the smell of a library left to rot. The flashlights cut through the darkness to reveal a scene that defied all logic. It wasn't a dungeon in the traditional sense. It was a classroom. A mock lecture hall buried in the middle of nowhere. There was a single desk, a chalkboard covered in Vane's handwriting, and a row of chairs facing the front. But the chairs were empty. Or so they thought. As the investigators moved deeper into this subterranean nightmare, they found the shelves. Lining the back wall were rows of airtight glass jars and archival boxes, labeled with the same meticulous care Vane applied to his academic papers. This was the Chandong that would redefine the entire case. Inside the boxes were personal effects. A debate team pin from 1995. A leather-bound journal from 1998. A scarf from a university in Chicago, 2001. A pair of reading glasses from a conference in Boston, 1994. These weren't random items, they were trophies. They were the silent remnants of other lives, other students who had challenged him, other minds he had decided to neutralize. The New York 2003 cold case shattered in that moment, expanding outward into a terrifying panorama of serial murder. Elena Vance wasn't an isolated incident. She was merely the one who got caught in the light. Julian Vane hadn't just killed a rival in New York. He had been hunting across the academic world for decades. The timeline of his career, the visiting professorships, the summer conferences, the sabbaticals, suddenly aligned with a string of cold cases that had stumped police departments across the country. The Manoir KY law of missing scholars, vanished researchers, and unexplained disappearances in university towns now had a singular, horrifying common denominator: Dr. Julian Vane. The atmosphere in the bunker was suffocating. The detectives realized they were standing in a shrine to narcissism. On the chalkboard, Vane had written a heading: The Failures of Modern Intellect. Beneath it were initials. Evie was there, Elena Vance. But so were others. AKMRJL. Each set of initials corresponded to a box. Each box corresponded to a person who had vanished into the ether, leaving behind grieving families and cold case files that had gone untouched for years.
Theo dư âm và nỗi ám ảnh of this discovery was instant and overwhelming.
The scope of Vane's crimes was not local. It was a cross-country odyssey of death disguised as a pursuit of knowledge. Back in New York, the news of the bunker broke just as the prison transport was arriving at the maximum security facility. The SOC Songdong reignited, burning hotter and fiercer than before. The victory of the verdict was instantly swallowed by the horror of the new reality. People began to realize that the professor was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history, a man who targeted the brightest minds because he couldn't stand the competition. The Chandong Sat Thursday Mang Mat Na Tri Tuk was no longer just a metaphor. It was a literal description of a man who used the cover of academia to access victims who trusted him implicitly. The investigation shifted gears instantly. The NYPD reached out to the FBI, and a task force was formed within the hour. Operation Ivory Tower. Their job was to identify the owners of the items in the boxes. It was a grim process of reverse engineering a massacre. The debate pin was traced to a 19-year-old prodigy who vanished from Yale in 1995. The Chicago scarf belonged to a teaching assistant who disappeared during a blizzard in 2001. The pattern was identical: brilliant young people, intellectual disagreements with Vane, and then silence. The Matt Ron Nuoy was that Vane had been fighting a one-man war against the future, killing anyone he deemed a threat to his intellectual supremacy. As the sun rose over the excavation site, the detectives brought out the boxes one by one, treating them with the reverence of holy relics. Each box was a life. Each box was a cold case solved, but at a terrible price. The detective who had spent 23 years hunting for Elena Vance stood by the open door of the bunker, looking at the initials on the board. He realized that solving Elena's murder hadn't finished the job. It had only opened the door to hell. The New York 2003 cold case was just the tip of the iceberg. The monster had been feeding for a long, long time. Inside the prison, Julian Vane sat in his cell, stripping off his tie. He didn't know about the bunker's discovery yet. He was likely thinking about his appeal, about how he could outsmart the legal system from the inside. But outside, the storm was gathering. The families of the other victims, those represented by the initials AK, MR, JL, were about to get the phone call they had dreaded for decades. The do va noim on was spreading across the map, connecting dots that no one knew existed. The story of the New York 2003 cold case was over, but the story of the collector of minds was just beginning. The silence of the bunker was broken by the sound of a camera shutter, capturing the evidence of a lifetime of evil. The ghosts were no longer quiet. They were screaming from the shelves, demanding their names back. The discovery of the bunker was the seismic event that turned a localized tragedy into a national nightmare, but the true horror lay in the logistics of the aftermath. The New York 2003 cold case had effectively been solved, but in its wake, it had torn open a Pandora's box that refused to be closed. The task force, now operating under the grim moniker Operation Ivory Tower, moved their base of operations from the local precinct to a federal facility. The air in the command center was thick with a specific kind of dread, the kind that comes when you realize the monster you just caught has been feeding for much longer than you ever imagined. The map on the wall, once focused solely on the Upper West Side and the Catskills, began to sprout red pins like a spreading infection. New Haven, Connecticut. St. Louis, Missouri. Chicago, Illinois. Boston, Massachusetts. Each pin represented a university town, a conference center, a place where intellect gathered and where Dr. Julian Vane had once walked. The first box to be processed from the bunker's shelf bore the initials AK and the date 1995. Inside, nestled in acid-free tissue paper, was a silver debate pin from Yale University. It didn't take long for the FBI to cross-reference the date with missing persons reports. Adam King. In 1995, King was a sophomore prodigy, a young man whose rhetorical skills were already becoming legendary in the Ivy League circuit. He had vanished during a nor'easter, walking back from a debate practice where he had famously dismantled a visiting lecturer's argument on utilitarianism. That visiting lecturer, records now confirmed, was Julian Vane. The Manoir KY law that had been ignored in 1995 was the fierce, public humiliation Vane had suffered at the hands of a 19-year-old. The police at the time had labeled King a runaway, a brilliant kid who cracked under pressure. Now, 30 years later, the truth was pinned to a corkboard in New York. King hadn't run away. He had been erased for the crime of being smarter than a narcissist. The phone call to Adam King's surviving sister was one of the hardest the lead detective ever had to make. To tell a family that their loved one is dead is one thing. To tell them that he has been a trophy in a serial killer's underground shrine for 3 decades is a cruelty that defies language. The SOC Tsongdong in New Haven was immediate. The cold case file, which had gathered dust in the basement of the Yale Police Department, was suddenly the most important document in the state. The Yale ghost, as King had come to be known, was finally real again. But this time, he wasn't a ghost. He was a victim of a predator who wore a tweed jacket. The investigation moved relentlessly to the next box, MR 1998. Inside was a leather-bound journal, the pages filled with dense, handwritten notes on theoretical physics. The name Maria Rodriguez surfaced from the archives of a research symposium in St. Louis. Maria was a rising star in her field, a woman breaking barriers in a male-dominated industry. She had disappeared from the hotel lobby the night after she presented a paper that contradicted Vane's own published work on historical determinism in Scientific Progress. The connection was tenuous, but undeniable. Vane was the keynote speaker at that conference. He had been seen having a spirited discussion with her at the hotel bar. Witnesses at the time described him as charming, even flirtatious. But looking back through the lens of the New York 2003 cold case solved, that charm looked like the lure of an anglerfish. The Chandung Sat Thursday Mang Mat Na Trai Tuk was becoming clearer. Vane didn't just target random students, he targeted threats. He targeted the future leaders of their fields, pruning the garden of intellect to ensure he remained the tallest tree. As the weeks dragged on, the media frenzy reached a fever pitch. The Professor Vane murders became the only story on television. News anchors broadcast live from outside the universities where the victims had vanished, tracing the missing years of Vane's timeline. Every gap in his resume, every summer sabbatical where he went off the grid to write, was now a potential killing window. The public was horrified by the sheer scale of the deception. This was a man who had been entrusted with the minds of the youth, a man who sat on ethics committees and graded papers, all while maintaining a collection of trophies from the students he had murdered. The Be Mat Ron Nuoi was the realization that his entire career was a facade for his hunting. He didn't teach to enlighten, he taught to scout. The third box, labeled JL 2001, contained a cashmere scarf, blue and gray. James Leong, a doctoral candidate at the University of Chicago. James was working on a thesis that overlapped significantly with Vane's upcoming book. He vanished 2 weeks before he was set to defend his dissertation. The police in Chicago had suspected suicide, citing the pressure of academia. They had found his backpack near the lake, a staged scene that Vane had likely orchestrated with the same meticulous care he used in New York. The cold case of James Leong was reopened with a violence that shook the university administration. Vane had been a guest lecturer that semester. He had even written a letter of recommendation for James, a letter that the FBI now read as a sick joke, a way for Vane to insert himself into the narrative of the man he was planning to kill. The pattern was terrifyingly consistent. Vane would identify a student who possessed a brilliance that intimidated him. He would befriend them, mentor them, or debate them. Then he would strike. He didn't use a gun or a knife. Those were crude tools. He used his intellect to trap them, and then he used isolation to destroy them. The bunker was the final resting place for their essence, if not their bodies. The bodies themselves remained missing, likely scattered across the country in places only Vane knew. The do am va noi am on for the families was the knowledge that while they might have the trophies back, they might never have a grave to visit. Back in the interrogation room, the dynamic had shifted. Vane was no longer the arrogant professor correcting the prosecutor's grammar. He was silent, watching the photos of the new victims being taped to the glass of the observation window. The investigators didn't ask him questions anymore. They just told him stories. They told him about Adam King's mother dying of a broken heart. They told him about Maria Rodriguez's daughter, who grew up thinking her mother had abandoned her. They weaponized the grief he had caused, trying to crack the shell of his indifference. But Vane remained a stone. The only time he reacted was when they brought up the specific academic arguments he had had with the victims. When the detective mentioned Adam King's critique of utilitarianism, Vane's eye twitched. He was derivative, Vane muttered, a whisper that was louder than a scream. He didn't understand the text. It was the confirmation they needed. He didn't kill for pleasure. He killed for editorial control. The Operation Ivory Tower team began to build a timeline of Vane's missing years. They found that in 1999, he took a year off to travel Europe. Interpol was alerted. In 2002, he spent a summer in a remote cabin in Washington state. The local sheriff there was contacted. The investigation was becoming a global excavation of a single man's life. The Chandong was the realization that Vane might not just be an American serial killer, he might be an international one. The mask of knowledge allowed him to cross borders, to enter prestigious circles, to vanish and reappear without anyone questioning his movements. Who questions a professor doing research? Who suspects the man in the library? The psychological profile of Vane was updated. He was classified as an intellectual narcissist killer. He viewed his victims not as people, but as errors in the manuscript of history, errors that he had the authority to delete. This fueled the media's obsession. Documentaries were already being greenlit. True crime podcasts were dissecting his lectures for hidden clues. The New York 2003 cold case had become the anchor for a story that spanned decades. But for the detectives, the noise was a distraction. They had a more pressing problem. There were 7 boxes in the bunker. They had identified 3. That meant there were still 4 students waiting in the dark for families who didn't yet know that their missing person was actually a trophy. The pressure to identify the remaining 4 victims was crushing. The items in the remaining boxes were more obscure. A fountain pen with no inscription. A pair of wire-rimmed spectacles. A heavily annotated copy of the Iliad. A single, black chess pawn. These were the manwa ky law that kept the task force awake at night. The chess pawn, in particular, felt like a taunt. Vane was a known chess player. Was this from a victim, or was it a symbol of the game he was playing? The FBI brought in experts to analyze the pen's nib, the prescription of the glasses, the handwriting in the book. Every microscopic detail was a potential name. One night, late in the command center, a junior analyst made a breakthrough with the copy of the Iliad. Under a UV light, on the inside of the back cover, a faint library stamp became visible. St. Jude's Academy, 1990. It was a prep school, a high school. The room went silent. The timeline had just pushed back further than they dared to think. 1990, Vane would have been in his late 30s, teaching at a prestigious boarding school before his university tenure. The victim wasn't a doctoral candidate or a researcher. The victim was a child, a high school student. The SOC Songdong that would follow this revelation would be unlike anything before. It meant Vane had been hunting children long before he hunted adults. The detectives pulled the file for St. Jude's Academy from 1990. One missing student, a boy named Lucas, a chess champion. The black pawn in the other box wasn't a symbol, it was a match. The pieces were falling into place with a sickening thud. Vane hadn't just silenced professional rivals, he had extinguished potential. He saw a brilliance in a 16-year-old boy and decided to snuff it out before it could grow.
The bí mật giận người West.
Vane wasn't just guarding his legacy, he was pruning the human race of anyone he deemed too bright. As Part 7 draws to a close, the scope of the horror is fully established. The New York 2003 cold case is now the epicenter of a massacre that spans distinct eras of Vane's life. The image of the bunker haunts the nation. But the detectives know that the hardest part is yet to come. They have to go to St. Jude's Academy. They have to tell a story that begins in a classroom 36 years ago. And they have to confront Vane with the one thing he might actually fear, the memory of his first kill. The cold case is no longer about temperature. It's about the absolute zero of a human soul. The camera pans over the remaining unidentified boxes, the pen, the glasses, silent witnesses waiting for their turn to speak. The investigation is far from over. In fact, the descent has only just begun. The drive to St. Jude's Academy is a journey back in time. The task force leaves the steel and glass of the federal building and heads into the rolling, mist-covered hills of rural Massachusetts. St. Jude's is a fortress of tradition, a place of brick and ivy where the children of the elite are molded into leaders. But as the unmarked sedans roll through the iron gates, the detectives don't see prestige. They see a hunting ground. The year 1990 feels ancient here, preserved in the oil paintings in the hallway and the smell of floor wax. This is where the monster was made. This is where Dr. Julian Vane learned that he could extinguish a light and get away with it. The headmaster, a man who was a junior teacher during Vane's tenure, meets them with a face drained of color. The SOC Songdong here is quiet, internalized, a horrified whisper among the faculty. They remember Vane. He was brilliant, demanding, and utterly charming. He was the faculty advisor for the debate team and, crucially, the chess club. The file on Lucas Thorne is thin, a tragedy compressed into a few sheets of paper. In 1990, Lucas was 16, a scholarship kid in a school of legacies. He was awkward, silent, but on the chessboard, he was a predator. The cold case report details his disappearance on a rainy Tuesday in October. He vanished from the library, leaving behind his backpack and a half-finished game on the board. The police at the time ruled it a runaway case, a troubled kid from a poor background overwhelmed by the pressure. But the detectives now know the truth. Lucas didn't run. He was removed. The Manwa KY law found in the bunker, the Black Pawn, and the copy of the Iliad tells a different story. Lucas wasn't overwhelmed by the school. He was overwhelmed by a teacher who couldn't handle being beaten. The task force interviews the old janitor, now in his 80s, who remembers that night. He recalls seeing Vane and Lucas in the library late, the sound of chess pieces clicking against the board echoing in the empty room. He remembers the silence that followed. He remembers Vane leaving alone, carrying a heavy duffel bag, looking exhilarated.
The bí mật giận người hít Teddy về hát.
Vane wasn't just disposing of a body. He was carrying away the evidence of his own inferiority. The motive for the first kill wasn't complex academic theory. It was petty, stinging defeat. Lucas Thorne, a 16-year-old boy, had checkmated the future Dr. Julian Vane. And for that, he had to die. Back in the interrogation room, the atmosphere is electric with this new knowledge. The detectives have the Black Pawn. It's a standard piece, weighted plastic, but to Vane, it is a relic. When the lead detective places it on the metal table, the effect is instantaneous. Vane's eyes lock onto it. The mask of knowledge doesn't just slip, it shatters. For the first time, there is no smug retort, no philosophical deflection. There is only a flash of pure, unadulterated hatred. This isn't the hate of a scholar for a rival. It's the hate of a man for the boy who saw him naked, stripped of his intellectual armor. He cheated. Vane hisses. The words spill out before he can stop them. It's the first time he has spoken about Lucas in 36 years. The chandong in the room is palpable. Vane launches into a tirade, not about the murder, but about the game. He describes the move Lucas made, a sacrificial night, a trap Vane didn't see coming. He describes the look in the boy's eyes, not of triumph, but of pity. That was the trigger. The pity. The idea that a child could look at him, the great Julian Vane, and feel sorry for his limited vision. The Chandong Sat Thursday is revealed in its rawest form, a man so fragile that a game of chess could turn him into a killer. The confession that follows is disjointed, manic. Vane admits to luring Lucas to the old boiler room under the pretext of discussing the Iliad. He admits to the strangulation, describing it as correcting a mistake on the board. He admits to burying the boy in the foundation of the new gymnasium that was being poured the next day.
The dư âm và nỗi ám ảnh of this revelation is now setting.
For 36 years, the students of St. Jude's have been playing basketball, cheering, and graduating over the bones of Lucas Thorne. The New York 2003 cold case has led them to a crypt beneath a high school gym. The news breaks, and the national horror deepens. The Professor Vane murders are no longer just an academic scandal. They are a slaughter of innocence. Parents of St. Jude's alumni are sickened. The SOC Songdong extends to every parent who ever trusted a teacher with their child. The image of the Black Pawn becomes the symbol of the case, a small, dark reminder of the fragility of life in the face of a bruised ego. The recovery team is dispatched to the school. The sounds of jackhammers tearing up the gymnasium floor are broadcast live, a cacophony of justice arriving 3 decades late. But as the detectives watch Vane stew in his cell, obsessively staring at the spot where the pawn had been, they know the puzzle isn't finished. There are still 2 unidentified boxes in the bunker, the wire-rimmed spectacles and the fountain pen. The timeline between Lucas in 1990 and Adam King in 1995 is 5 years. 5 years is a long time for a predator to go dormant after his first taste of blood. The Manwa KY law suggests that Vane didn't stop. He just got better at hiding it. He refined his method. He moved from the messy, emotional kill of a high schooler to the calculated removals of adults. The fountain pen becomes the next focus. It's an expensive brand, German-made, vintage. The FBI traces the serial number on the nib, a microscopic engraving that Vane likely never noticed. It leads to a boutique stationery shop in Cambridge, England. The purchase date, 1993. The buyer, a visiting fellow named Simon Hall. The missing years are filling in. 1993, Vane was in England for a semester at Oxford. Simon Hall was a brilliant, eccentric linguist who vanished during a rowing trip. His body was never found. His boat was found drifting empty. The British authorities had ruled it a misadventure. But now, the cold case crosses the Atlantic. The scope of Vane's crimes is now international. The New York 2003 cold case solved has triggered a global manhunt for the dead. The betrayal is that Vane treated the world as his personal hunting reserve. He killed in America, he killed in England, and God knows where else. As the jackhammers at St. Jude's finally hit something that isn't concrete, the detectives in the command center are already on the phone with Scotland Yard. The wire-rimmed spectacles are the last piece. They look old, fragile. They don't fit the profile of a student. They look like they belong to someone older. A peer? A mentor? Vane is watching the news in the common area of the holding unit. He sees the footage from St. Jude's. He sees the photo of Simon Hall flashed on the screen. He doesn't look worried. He looks validated. In his twisted mind, he is finally getting the recognition he deserves. He isn't just a professor. He is a force of nature. But then, the lead detective walks in, holding the bag with the wire-rimmed spectacles. He doesn't say a word. He just holds them up. And for the first time, Vane flinches. A real, involuntary recoil. Fear. These glasses mean something different. They aren't a trophy of a rival. They are a trophy of a secret that Vane has kept even from his diary. The glasses didn't belong to a student. They belonged to the one person Vane was supposed to love. The wire-rimmed spectacles sit on the interrogation table, looking small and impossibly fragile against the cold steel. They are not just evidence. They are a key that unlocks the deepest, darkest room in Julian Vane's psyche. The silence in the room is heavy, suffocating. Vane is no longer looking at the detective with disdain. He is staring at those glasses with the wide, terrified eyes of a child who has just broken something priceless. The air conditioning hums, but Vane is sweating. The New York 2003 cold case has peeled back layers of soil and concrete to find bodies, but now it is peeling back the layers of the killer's soul to find the origin of the rot. The trace on the glasses was a masterpiece of forensic archival work. The FBI didn't look at missing persons reports this time. They looked at obituaries. They looked at the history of the Vane family itself. The prescription was unique, a bifocal grind specific to a severe astigmatism, crafted by a boutique optometrist in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in 1986. The customer wasn't a student. It wasn't a rival. It was Professor Alistair Vane, Julian's father, a titan of the Ivy League, a man whose textbooks were mandatory reading in every history department in the country. A man who died in a tragic, accidental fall down the stairs of his faculty housing in the winter of 1987. The SOC Songdong that hits the detectives is different this time. It's not the horror of a predator hunting strangers. It's the biblical horror of patricide. The cold case of Alistair Vane was never even a case. It was ruled a domestic accident, a clumsy misstep by an aging scholar. But the wire-rimmed spectacles tell a different story. They were found in the bunker, in a box labeled The Origin. Vane hadn't just kept them as a keepsake, he had kept them as a trophy. He had taken them off his father's broken face before he called the ambulance. When the lead detective says the name, Alistair, Vane flinches as if struck. The mask of knowledge dissolves completely, revealing a trembling, insecure man who has spent his entire life running from a ghost. The interrogation shifts. It's no longer about catching a killer. It's about understanding a monster. The detective leans in, his voice low. He wasn't an accident. Was he Julian? He was the first draft. Vane begins to speak, his voice cracking, stripped of its polished, academic cadence. He transports the room back to 1987. He was 27, a struggling PhD candidate, desperate for his father's approval. But Alistair Vane was not a man who gave approval. He gave corrections. Julian describes the night of the accident. He had brought his dissertation draft to his father, seeking praise. Instead, Alistair had put on those wire-rimmed spectacles, read the first chapter, and looked at his son with a withering disappointment that cut deeper than any knife. "It's derivative, Julian," his father had said. "It's intellectually dishonest. You are not a scholar. You are a mimic."
The bí mật giận người Isfanali lai bày.
The motive for decades of slaughter wasn't just competition, it was projection. Every time Julian Vane saw a brilliant student, every time he saw a Lucas Thorne or an Elena Vance or an Adam King, he didn't just see a rival. He saw his father. He saw the judgment. He saw the eyes behind those wire-rimmed spectacles looking down at him, calling him a fraud. Killing them was his way of killing his father over and over again. It was a ritualistic silencing of the voice that told him he wasn't good enough. The Chandong ripples through the observation room. The psychological profile clicks into place with a terrifying precision. Vane didn't kill the students because he hated them. He killed them because they were real scholars and he knew, deep down, that he was a counterfeit. He stole their lives to protect the lie of his own genius. The Manoir KY law of the trophies, the debate pin, the chess pawn, the dissertation notes, were all symbols of the talent he lacked. He was collecting the pieces of a brilliance he could never possess. Vane recounts the moment of the murder with a chilling, pathetic clarity. He describes the push. It wasn't premeditated in the way the later murders were. It was a flash of rage, a desperate need to stop the voice that was dismantling his ego. He watched his father fall. He watched the glasses skitter across the floorboards. And in that silence, standing at the top of the stairs, Julian Vane felt a surge of power he had never felt in a library. He realized that he couldn't outthink his father, but he could outlive him. He picked up the glasses, pocketed them, and dialed 911 with a feigned panic. The accident was the birth of the New York 2003 cold case killer. The revelation sends shockwaves through the media. The Professor Vane murders are now recontextualized as a 40-year saga of blood and ink. The university that had honored Alistair Vane and employed Julian Vane is left reeling. They had harbored a dynasty of death.
Thezu và nỗi ám ảnh ES profile.
The students realized that the man who taught them ethics was a man who had murdered his own father to secure his tenure. The mask of knowledge was actually a mask of patricide. But the detective isn't finished. There is still one loose thread. The bunker had 7 boxes. They have identified Alistair, 1987, Lucas, 1990, Simon, 1993, Adam, 1995, Maria, 1998, James, 2001, and Elena, 2003. That accounts for the 7 boxes. The timeline is complete. The circle is closed. Or so they think. As Vane weeps in the interrogation room, not for his father, but for himself, the forensic team in the bunker makes one final, confused discovery. Behind the shelf, wedged into the concrete wall, is a loose brick. Behind the brick is not a box, but an envelope. A small, yellowed envelope sealed with wax. The cold case investigators handle it with surgical care. They open it. Inside is not a trophy from a victim. It is a letter. The handwriting is unmistakable. It is Alistair Vane's. But the date on the letter is from after the autopsy report was filed. The room spins. How can a dead man write a letter? The Manoir KY law turns into a ghost story. The team realizes the date isn't the date of writing, it's the date of delivery. It was a letter Alistair had written to the university dean, dated to be sent the morning after he died. Julian had intercepted it. He had kept it. The detective reads the letter aloud to Vane. It is a formal accusation of plagiarism. Alistair was planning to expose his own son. He was going to ruin Julian's career before it even started. "My son," the letter reads, "possesses the ambition of a king but the mind of a thief." Vane howls. It is a sound of pure, animalistic agony. He had killed his father to stop the exposure, but he had kept the letter as a reminder of how close he came to the edge. The New York 2003 cold case has now cannibalized its own history. The investigation has proven that Julian Vane's entire life was a crime scene. From 1987 to 2026, every lecture he gave, every grade he awarded, every handshake he offered was built on the foundation of a lie protected by murder.
The chân dung sát thủ IS Comlet.
He is not a tragic figure. He is a hollow man who filled his void with the bones of the better men and women around him. As Part 9 concludes, the camera pulls back from the sobbing figure of Vane in the interrogation room. He is broken, stripped of his glasses, his tie, and his dignity. The New York 2003 cold case solved. Text flashes on the screen, but the victory feels like ash. The mystery is solved, the victims are named, the origin is revealed. But the darkness of the story is absolute. The detective walks out of the room, closing the heavy metal door. The click of the lock is the final period on a sentence that took 40 years to write. But as the screen fades to black, a single question remains for the final act. Now that the truth is out, what happens to the legacy of the innocent? And how does a community heal when its temple of learning was built by a butcher? The winter of 2026 finally breaks, giving way to a tentative, fragile spring. The snow that had blanketed the excavation sites in the Catskills and the manicured lawns of St. Jude's Academy melts into the earth, carrying with it the frantic energy of the investigation. The New York 2003 cold case is technically closed, but the psychological winter remains. The city is suffering from a collective hangover, a nausea born from the realization that they had celebrated a monster for decades. The headlines have shifted. They no longer scream about the New York 2003 cold case solved or the Professor Vane murders. They have begun to speak the names of the dead. The media, often so hungry for the killer's face, finally turns its lens toward the empty spaces he left behind. The SOC Songdong transforms from adrenaline into a deep, morning ache. Operation Ivory Tower officially disbands, its mission of capture complete. But a new mission begins. Operation Reclamation. The university, desperate to scrub the stain of Julian Vane from its history, begins a systematic purge. His name is chiseled off the donor wall in the main library. His portrait is removed from the faculty lounge and burned in a private ceremony, not out of ritual, but out of a refusal to let his eyes watch over another generation of students. His books are pulled from the shelves, not banned, but recategorized as evidence of a pathology rather than history. The mask of knowledge is dismantled brick by brick. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for a rainy Tuesday in April. It is not a trial. Guilt is already established.
This is the moment for the dư âm và nỗi ám ảnh to be given a voice.
The courtroom is packed, but the atmosphere is different. There is no tension, only a heavy, sacred solemnity. The gallery is a sea of black clothing. The families of the 7 victims sit together, a patchwork of grief that spans 40 years and 2 continents. They are strangers united by a singular tragedy. The New York 2003 cold case brought them here, but they are here for Alastair, Lucas, Simon, Adam, Maria, James, and Elena. Julian Vane enters the room. He is unrecognizable. The prison system has stripped him of his tweed, his ties, and his dignity. He wears an orange jumpsuit that hangs loosely on his frame. Without his glasses, now evidence in a box, he squints, looking confused and small. The Chandung Sat Thursday has shriveled. He is no longer the intellectual giant who debated ethics. He is a frail old man shuffling in shackles. He refuses to look at the gallery. He stares at the table, perhaps realizing that for the first time in his life, he is the least important person in the room. The judge opens the floor for victim impact statements. This is the reckoning. One by one, the survivors stand up to reclaim the narrative. Adam King's sister, now a woman in her 50s, speaks first. She doesn't talk about the debate pin or the trophy. She talks about Adam's laugh, his terrible cooking, his dream of becoming a civil rights lawyer. She tells Vane that he didn't kill a rival. He killed a future. "You thought you were extinguishing a fire," she says, her voice trembling but clear. "But you only burned yourself. Adam is light. You are just ash." Then comes the representative for Lucas Thorne, his old chess coach, now stooped with age. He places a new, white pawn on the railing of the witness box. For 36 years, he says, his voice raspy, we thought Lucas quit. We thought he gave up. But he won. He beat you in 1990, and he beat you today. You're going to prison because a 16-year-old boy was smarter than you. The Manwa KY law of the chess game is finally resolved. It wasn't a murder. It was a sore loser flipping the board. Vane shrinks visibly, the memory of that defeat in the library seemingly more painful than the shackles on his wrists. But the courtroom falls into a profound, ringing silence when Elena Vance's mother approaches the podium. She is the face of the New York 2003 cold case. She holds a single sheet of paper. She doesn't scream. She doesn't cry. She looks directly at Vane, forcing him to lift his head. I waited 23 years for this moment, she begins. I thought I would want to hurt you. I thought I would want to see you suffer. She pauses, the bemat raw nuoi of her grief hanging in the air. But looking at you now, I don't feel hate. I feel nothing. You are a footnote, Julian. You are a typo in the book of life. Elena is the story. Her words land with the force of a final judgment. She strips him of his power. She denies him the satisfaction of being a villain worth hating. She reduces him to exactly what his father accused him of being, a fraud, a mimic, a nothing. They SOC Songdong, and the room shifts to a sense of catharsis. The monster is not a dragon. He is a parasite, and he has been removed. When the judge finally speaks, his voice is devoid of the usual legal detachment. He looks at Vane with open contempt. Dr. Vane, he says, emphasizing the title with a scathing irony. You spent your life trying to curate history. You tried to edit the world to fit your ego. Today, the world edits you out. The sentence is handed down, 7 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each victim, plus an additional 30 years for the kidnapping and concealment. It is a symbolic number, stretching into infinity. He is sentenced to die in a cage, surrounded by strangers, with no audience to lecture. As the gavel falls for the final time, the sound is different. It's not a crack, it's a seal. The New York 2003 cold case is officially over. The officers move to take Vane away. He stands up, and for a fleeting second, he looks toward the gallery, perhaps looking for one last moment of recognition, one last acknowledgement of his genius. But no one is looking at him. The families are hugging each other. The reporters are typing furiously. The detectives are shaking hands. Julian Vane is invisible. He is led out of the side door, vanishing into the system, a ghost exorcised from the machine. Outside the courthouse, the rain has stopped. The sun breaks through the clouds, illuminating the wet pavement of Manhattan. The dew and va noim on will linger. You cannot erase 40 years of darkness in a day, but the fear is gone. The mask of knowledge lies shattered on the courtroom floor. The camera pans up, away from the legal chaos, away from the prison transport ben navigating the traffic, and rests on the skyline of the city. It finds the university campus in the distance, standing tall against the horizon. The library is still there. The students are still there. The pursuit of truth continues, unbowed and unbroken. The New York 2003 cold case solved is the headline on every phone screen on the street, but the subtext is what matters. The city survived. The families survived. The truth survived. As the sun sets on the final day of the legal proceedings, the story of Julian Vane ends. But the story of Elena, Adam, Lucas, and the others begins anew, not as victims, but as the stars that the darkness could not hide. Time moves differently in New York. It is a city of constant erasure and reinvention, where skyscrapers rise over the footprints of demolished history in the blink of an eye. But some scars take longer to fade. 1 year has passed since the gavel fell on Julian Vane, and the New York 2003 cold case has transitioned from a breaking news banner into the permanent folklore of the metropolis. The seasons have turned a full cycle. The harsh winter that unearthed the bunker gave way to a hesitant spring, a sweltering summer, and now, autumn has returned to the Upper West Side. The leaves on the trees along Riverside Park are turning the color of old gold, mirroring the time when Elena Vance first walked these streets. But this autumn feels different. The air is no longer holding its breath. The dew and va noim on that choked the university district for decades is lifted, replaced by a clarity that is sharp, bright, and undeniable. The physical erasure of the killer was swift and clinical. The university, keen to cauterize the wound, didn't just rename buildings. They performed a kind of architectural exorcism. The office where Vane wrote his diary, where he watched the police from his window with a god complex, has been gutted. The mahogany paneling where he hid his secrets was torn out, splintered, and hauled away. The space has been repurposed into a collaborative study lounge, a room filled with glass walls and sunlight, designed specifically so that no one can ever hide in the dark again. It is a subtle, powerful rebuke to the man who loved shadows. The mask of knowledge that Vane wore was built on isolation. The university's answer is transparency. In the center of the campus, where the statue of a long-dead founder once stood, there is a new installation. It is not a statue of Elena, nor is it a monument to the tragedy. It is a garden. 7 distinct beds of flowers, each chosen to bloom in a different month, ensuring that even in the depth of winter, something is alive. A small plaque, unobtrusive and humble, lists the names: Alastair, Lucas, Simon, Adam, Maria, James, Elena. There is no mention of the New York 2003 cold case or the professor. The killer has been denied entry here. This space belongs to the potential that was stolen and the beauty that remains. Students sit on the benches, reading, debating, laughing, unaware that they are protected by the memory of those who came before them. The SOC Tsongdong has healed into a protective scar tissue. For the lead detective, the year has been a long decompression. The box labeled Vane sits in the archives, finally taped shut, but the silence in his head took months to achieve. He retired 3 months after the sentencing. He didn't want to party. He just wanted to walk out of the precinct without looking at the cold case board. He spends his days now fishing off the coast of Long Island, staring at the horizon where the water meets the sky. But every now and then, he takes a small, worn notebook out of his pocket. It contains the contact numbers of the families. He doesn't call them often. There is nothing left to say, but seeing the names is a reminder that the system, for all its flaws and delays, eventually worked. He thinks about the Manhwa KY law, the bike messenger, the chess pawn, the glasses. He realizes that justice wasn't a lightning bolt. It was an avalanche, composed of a million small snowflakes of truth that finally gained enough weight to crush the lie. And what of the Chandong Sat Thursday? Julian Vane is alive, but he ceases to exist. He is inmate number 8940 in a maximum security facility upstate, not far from the very woods where he buried his secrets. The irony is geologic. He is housed in a unit for high-risk offenders, but the risk is not that he will kill again. The risk is that he will be killed. The general population knows who he is. They know he preyed on the young and the brilliant. Even in prison, there is a hierarchy, and a man who murders children and students is at the bottom. Vane spends 23 hours a day in a cell that is smaller than his university bathroom. He has no books. He has no pen. He has no audience. The prison guards report that he rarely speaks. The eloquent orator, the man who could mesmerize a lecture hall, has been reduced to a mute ghost. He spends his hours pacing, tracing the lines of the cinder blocks with his fingers, perhaps playing a game of chess in his mind that he can never win. The Mat Ron Nuoi of his existence is that without the reflection of others to feed his narcissism, he is nothing. He withered the moment the cameras turned away. He waits for mail that never comes. He waits for visitors who never check in. He is trapped in the cold case of his own making, frozen in a timeless purgatory where he is the only subject and he is bored by his own company. The true legacy of the case, however, is found in the living. The families of the victims, once isolated islands of grief, have formed an archipelago of support. They call themselves the Seven. They meet once a year, not to mourn but to update. Elena's mother helps Adam King's sister with her garden. Lucas Thorne's old chess coach plays online games with Maria Rodriguez's daughter. They have created a family out of the debris of destruction. The Chandong of the crimes broke their lives apart, but in the rebuilding, they found pieces of each other that fit together. They have launched a scholarship foundation, the Unfinished Symphony, which funds students who show exceptional promise and independent thought, the very qualities Vane tried to extinguish. Every year, 7 students are sent to university with a full ride, carrying the names of the dead on their diplomas. It is the ultimate victory. Vane tried to stop the future. They have ensured it accelerates. On the anniversary of the arrest, a documentary airs. It is not the sensationalist trash that Vane would have hated and secretly loved. It is a sober, forensic examination of the failure of institutions to protect their own. It asks hard questions about the mask of knowledge, about how we blind ourselves to the darkness when it is draped in tweed and speaks with an educated accent. It forces the academic world to look in the mirror. New protocols are established. Background checks are deepened. The New York 2003 cold case becomes a case study in criminal psychology courses, taught not as a triumph of a genius killer, but as a failure of a complacent system. Vane becomes a cautionary tale, a specimen in a jar, dissected by the very students he despised. As night falls over New York City, the lights of the skyline flicker on, a constellation of millions of lives being lived in parallel. The camera glides over the Hudson River, the black water reflecting the city that never sleeps. It moves past the George Washington Bridge, past the quiet streets of the Upper West Side, and hovers over the apartment building on 114th Street where Elena Vance lived. There is a new tenant in her apartment now, a young woman, a musician, practicing the cello near the window. The sound of the music drifts out into the cool autumn air, mingling with the traffic and the wind. It is a melancholy, beautiful sound. The ghost of 2003 is gone. The fear that made people look over their shoulders has evaporated. The New York 2003 cold case solved is history. But the lesson remains etched in the pavement. The truth is resilient. It can be buried under concrete, hidden behind false walls, and obscured by decades of lies. It can be silenced by power and prestige. But it cannot be destroyed. Like a seed waiting for the fire to clear the forest, it waits. And when it finally breaks the surface, it doesn't just reveal the darkness. It demands the light. The final image is of the single, silver star earring, Elena's earring, now returned to her mother. It sits in a small velvet box on a nightstand, next to a photo of Elena smiling in her graduation gown. The camera focuses on the star, catching a glint of the morning sun. It is a small thing, a tiny piece of metal. But it outlasted the monster. It outlasted the winter. It is the North Star of a story that ended not in darkness, but in a dawn that no one can ever take away. The screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of the city, breathing, alive, and moving forward.